Everyone, I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council, and will the city clerk call the roll?
Mayor Stewart,
Here.
Councilmember Kovar, Councilmember Dabala,
I'm here.
Councilmember Kostick,
Here.
Councilmember Siemens,
Present.
Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
Great. Terrific. Well, this evening we have a presentation going over the minor master plan for what we've been talking about is the area in Washington, what had been Washington Adventist Hospital near Washington Adventist University and up along Maple Avenue to the community center. And the exact boundaries of this study is exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'm first going to turn it over to Ms. Grigsby, who can talk about the overview of the project. And then I know we have a lot of planning department staff with us tonight. So Ms. Grigsby.
Good evening. As Mayor Stewart said, we're talking about the minor master plan for the area of the hospital campus, the university campus, parts of Maple Avenue. We will be discussing the boundary. We're joined tonight by Montgomery planning staff. We have Elsa Heisel McCoy, who's the planning chief for Down County Planning, Leslie Howerton, who's the master planner supervisor, John Marcolin, the lead planner coordinator, and Melissa Williams, senior planner. They are all on tonight. And I will turn it over. I think they're going to do a screen share for their presentation. Elsa, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Roz and Mayor Stewart and Council, thank you so much for having us back. We're very excited. And certainly we've had a great time working with Suzanne and Roz on moving this forward. So we're very appreciative. And this evening, I will turn it over to if Leslie Howerton has anything to say. If not, we'll turn it over to John Mark.
Thanks, Elsa. I'm not able to share my screen. I think it has to be screen share has to be enabled by the host. That's what it's telling me.
Sure, we'll get you there.
Okay.
Irma or Jessica? Irma, it's got to be, you're the host. Can you, if you click on the participant button, it should give you the option.
Sorry, I'm working on it. Where'd it go? Okay. Yeah, I don't see that option. Let me see.
I mean, if you want to make me the host again, I think I'll be able to enable
actually, that's what I'm doing right now.
Okay.
Passing it on to you.
Hold tight, everyone. This is what happens when Jessie leaves. She's our city clerk. She's the expert.
Okay.
Okay, it should be enabled now.
Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. As Ross said, my name is John Marcolin. I'm a landscape architect and urban designer at the planning department, and I will be the project manager for this minor master plan amendment. The minor master plan process is a comprehensive review, but of a smaller area in a compressed timeline. The Como Park City Council, the Planning Board, and the County Council will review, comment, and approve the recommendations in the final plan. There is a defined scope of work in a focused public engagement process, and Melissa Williams will discuss that a little bit later. The importance of this plan. This plan is important because state law requires a comprehensive review through master plan process before any zoning changes are made. It is needed to assess the future needs of the future Washington Adventist Hospital campus and surrounding communities and how that campus will be used. The plan will provide goals and recommendations for any future development, and it is an open, transparent process. Equity in planning. The Montgomery County Racial Equity and Social Justice Act, which the County Council signed into law in December 2019 to actively address racial disparities within the county, requires the Planning Board to consider racial equity and social justice impacts when preparing a master plan. Pursuant thereto, all plan process elements will be implemented with the lens of equity. Ongoing planning initiatives. There are two I'll mention. Thrive Montgomery 2050, as you know, is the update of the general plan, and it's at the it's at the County Council now. And we are doing the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative. It aims to identify viable options for existing and new county residents to find homes at the right sizes, locations, and price points. It aims to expand home ownership opportunities for the county's diverse populations, and it will consider various policy options to spur the development of more diverse housing types, including missing middle housing. The MOU. We entered into an MOU with Como Park that defines and coordinates our roles and responsibilities, defines the process and schedule, introduces communications and the outreach plan, and establishes primary points of contact. In the MOU, the planning department is the lead agency in the administration, engagement, development, quality assurance, and production of all deliverables for the plan through all phases of the planning process. The city will provide support and collaborate in the engagement, development, quality assurance, and production of all deliverables for the plan. Planning and city staff will brief the city council at key milestones prior to briefing the planning board. And planning staff and the City of Tacoma Park staff will coordinate regularly during ongoing project coordination meetings, and these are bi-weekly. The schedule. We briefed the City Council in March 24th in 2021, and we are planning to go to the Planning Board to present the scope of work June 24th. After that, we will begin existing conditions research. That will take place roughly between July and November 2021. We also will be getting community engagement at the same time. Then visioning and development of preliminary recommendations will take place between December 2021 and April 2022. In May to September of 2022, we will work on the staff draft. And all along the way, at each step, we will present to the community and then to the City Council and to the Planning Board in that order. In September of 2022, we will have a public hearing at the Planning Board to present the public draft, Planning Board draft, excuse me, the staff draft. Then we'll have work sessions where we report out to the Planning Board. And there will be a County Council public hearing in January 2023. The County Council committee and work sessions will take place between February and May of 2023. And after that, after the plan is approved and adopted, we'll go through the sectional map amendment process where the recommendations are codified into zoning. If you have any questions, you can feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'll continue. Okay, the scope of work. The Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment is an update to a small portion of the 2000 Tacoma Park Master Plan. The scope of work defines the study area, the planning framework, the engagement strategy, and specific plan elements to be explored, and it presents the boundaries of the plan area. Okay, so this is the main thing we want to talk about tonight. The boundary, in the boundary, the key points that we want to cover are the Washington Adventist campus, the Maple Avenue corridor, and the community facilities. And to give you some context, this line in black, if you follow my cursor, that is existing Tacoma Park master plan boundary. In blue is a Long Branch sector plan boundary, and in green is a Tacoma Langley Crossroads boundary. This is a zoomed in image of the proposed boundary. In 2019, the city staff requested that we look at the Washington Adventist campus and look at the civic vision from the 2000 plan for Maple Avenue. He also asked us to look at multifamily housing along Maple Avenue, and that's what we tried to do with this plan. It covers the Washington Adventist Hospital site here, the Washington Adventist University campus, the multifamily zone properties along Maple Avenue, the municipal properties here, community center, the schools and the parks. And we included the Hefner Park here where my cursor is, and the Opal Daniels Park to the south here. And now I'm going to ask Melissa Williams to discuss the community engagement process.
John, I'm sorry, this is also before we move on to that, I guess to the mayor and council. We just have a couple more slides. We're happy to go through the whole thing and then come back and talk about whatever you want. Or did you want to talk about the boundary first?
I was why don't we go through everything, because I have a feeling we could get stuck on the boundary and not get it through everything else. So let's go through the whole thing. Yeah, it's a great idea.
Okay. So once again, I'm Melissa Williams. I'm going to be responsible for working with the City of Tacoma Park on their community engagement and outreach. And we've come up with, this is our kind of preliminary strategy, and this is something that we've done that's been very successful with our other plans. And we have an engagement strategy that has 4 phases. And so it's listening, visioning, refining, and sharing. And each phase builds on the previous phase. So essentially what we're talking about is right now we're going to be entering that listening phase once we get the boundary approved and we get through the scope of work. And that's where we will work with the City of Tacoma Park. We'll identify all of the stakeholders, all of the relevant participants, and we'll start to engage them in the process of finding out what are their overall concerns and what would they like to, what are their overall concerns and what are they hoping to get out of this plan process? And we'll take that information and then we move into visioning. And visioning is probably the part that people are most familiar with. That's where we start to put pen to paper and we come up with kind of very tentative recommendations. We start to imagine what, in a perfect world, what could we end up with? What could the City of Tacoma Park and all of the stakeholders hope to gain out of this process? And then we move into refining. And that's kind of where the reality kicks in. Okay, we've come up with this really grand vision. Everyone's excited. And now we have to figure out how do we make that happen? And we refine it based on the tools that we have at our disposal. And then we have sharing, which is essentially now we've distilled this information into recommendations, kind of into things that can be easily implemented. And we come back and we start to disseminate that information back out to the stakeholders and to the general public. I saw Mayor Stewart's hand up. I wasn't sure if she had a question. Okay, and so the tools and the approach that we use to do that, so this is just very general. We're going to expand this as necessary, and as new tools become available, they'll be added to the list. But right now, what we're looking at are opportunities to work with all of the successful engagement tools that the City of Tacoma Park has actually created. So we're going to be looking to you to use your listserv, to work with you on a joint website, to cross-pollinate our email and our mail communication so that we're tapping into this existing network that you already have. We're also going to look to have regular meetings and check-ins with stakeholders. And what we mean by that is that community, like civic associations and homeowners associations typically have their standing meetings. We always look for an opportunity to kind of piggyback on things that are already happening. That gives us an opportunity to kind of be in the place where the majority of the people are. So that's something that's great. We'll also schedule our own activities as necessary and as needed. And then we have information sessions. And those information sessions are, they could take the form of office hours, which we could do virtual and in person. If they're in person, we would try and spread those out through the community. Once again, trying to meet people where they're currently located. We would also look to have a town hall. We've had some success with that during COVID periods where we did those virtually. That's been successful. We are going to try and see how can we kind of replicate that success and hold something in person. And then we do kind of drop-ins, where essentially given the opportunity, we could set up a display that would have information in a high traffic area where people could actually walk through kind of the display. We'd have someone there and they could answer questions. So we're always looking for creative ways to engage people. We're looking for opportunities where they're already kind of high traffic areas or high traffic situations to work with people. And then we're also going to be relying heavily on the City of Tacoma Park, because we know that you do engagement to your stakeholders incredibly well. And there's no sense in kind of recreating the wheel if you're already doing things that are working. So we're going to try and partner with you as much as possible. And that is kind of our general engagement and outreach strategy that we have in place right now. And are there any questions or comments? Okay, if not, I'm going to turn this back over to John.
Thanks,
And
Melissa.
wrapping up.
And we just have one last slide, and I already went over these steps. The next step is to present the scope to the planning board, and then we begin community engagement process, which Melissa just described to you. And then at the same time, our existing conditions analysis and data collection. So we can open it up to questions now. And I'll go back to the map plan.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. So first, thank you, John and Melissa, for outlining all the steps and the process. I think, and John, I don't know if this falls to you particularly, but I think what might be helpful as we're looking at the map is if you could give us some of the thinking behind why it's being drawn this way right now, I guess. Like, why include Opal Daniels and Park? If there's some things you want to tell us about the thinking that's gone into
sure.
what's being proposed.
We work with the city staff, and Leslie and Elza, feel free to jump in. This plan originated with the original meeting with city staff. I think it was in 2019 when they asked us to look at the Washington Adventist Hospital campus site and the Maple Avenue properties, and specifically the multifamily properties along Maple Avenue. And they also recently asked us to include Opal Daniels Park and Hafner Park. So our idea was to keep the focus of the plan keep the plan as focused as possible on the old hospital campus site and the properties along Maple Avenue, this civic spine, so to speak. And Leslie, if you want to jump in and add something I missed, or Elza, go right ahead.
I was going to let you jump in first.
The short answer was that city staff asked, particularly that Opal Daniels and Hefner Park be added. I think, and I guess I'll let Susie speak for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and actually we've gone through at a staff level several different discussions of boundaries. So some of this was in some respects a little bit left over, but the general idea is how do we have a boundary, and this may be better left to Leslie or Elza, but how do we have a boundary that's a good study area that shows connections among these resources? what is it that allows for the either rezoning, which is, you can't do rezoning outside of the boundaries of the area. And if there's some kind of zoning that's needed to accomplish a goal, it needs to be included. But more than that, it's how are these things connected? How can you walk among them? How can, are there some facilities that make some sense? And I'm not sure that Opal Daniels necessarily needs to be included. Now, in one of the earlier versions, it wasn't so much of an outlier in the way that the boundary goes around. But I also know that it's a facility that people who don't live right near it, that people don't even know it's there or how to get there. And so part of it is to try to make it a more usable and known connected space. The area with Hefner is an area where, in particular, not just this part that sticks out, but the part that goes closer to Tacoma Park Middle School was kind of left out, and that really does function as part of the open space and the natural area, I guess, in that area. So we wanted to make sure that wasn't left out. And again, these are areas that, not so much the part that the arrow is on at the moment, but the rest of it right there, are connections to Tacoma Park Middle School and how people get to and from the areas. So thinking about those things are important. I think one of the things that the city staff were very interested in looking at the properties that have multifamily buildings is that many of them have land behind the buildings that are kind of left over. They're not being valued as natural space. They're not being used. They're not making money to help the business of the apartment building or the condo, be kind of financially sustainable. Is there a way that things can be, as we're looking at how housing can be better provided, is there some flexibility that could be included there? So it's really helpful to have the boundary include the full properties of the multifamily buildings so we can think about it and talk out options. Don't know how it's going to come out. I'm very interested. I'll see from a distance how that visioning works, but making sure that it's within the boundaries so it can be talked about is kind of what this discussion, I think, tonight is about.
And if I just, is the goal also to include mostly the multifamily buildings in the area? And is that why we go up so far on Lee Avenue and not, for example, Grant?
I think the multifamily properties that we included on Lee, I think were ones that had existing multifamily zoning. The attainable housing strategy that John mentioned earlier in the plan is taking sort of a countywide approach towards looking at looking at ways to provide additional housing in those areas. And so we didn't want to, and they're on a different timeline, a different time frame. And again, they're taking sort of a broader look. So we didn't want to duplicate that. But I think that line is really following the zoning, the multifamily zoning that's there now.
That's correct.
Cool. And I have one more question, then I promise I'll turn it over to Councilmember Siemens. It looks like here, we have the other city facilities, but it looks like Public Works on Ritchie is not included. Is there a reason to include, not include it?
I want to say again that the issue, I think, came back to zoning. John or Susie or Roz can probably correct me. I want to say that the Public Works there is single family zoning. But again, as a public facility, I think that if the city council wanted us to look at including that, I think, sort of the next step after this is to sort of get all the comments that we hear from the city council together and include them in our presentation to the planning board. So I think if there's a desire on the city council to, to add the public works site, I think that's a comment that we can include.
I think for me, it makes sense to include it, but I'll see what my colleagues think and we can come back to that. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And I thank you to our guests tonight. It's really great to see that that we're having a visible first step. It may not be the first step, but it's the first one that's visible to the public. And thank you so much for the work you've put into this. Bringing a map is something we can touch and feel and start to understand the scope of this a little bit better. I have kind of two questions. One is, Ms. Ludlow mentioned the word goal, I think that's the overarching question is, what is the goal or the vision that we're aiming towards in doing this minor master plan? What are we trying to accomplish? Is it, higher density residential property? Is it, what could we say that we're trying to accomplish by doing this?
I could answer to that. I would like to just note that when the hospital was just still starting to move, there was a lot of interest in trying to match up community needs. What do we need for an elementary school, for community health services, for childcare services, for things? And how does that match up with the facilities or the space that we have? And so part of this was to allow for a discussion to see, we don't just have to always have Piney Branch Elementary School in Piney Branch Elementary School if that's not a good facility or whatever. Is there a way to mix and match the elements of the community so that moving forward, it makes more sense? So I don't know that anybody's going into this with a goal that we're changing zoning for zoning's sake. It's more, how do we have a visioning discussion and sense about how do we want this area to function? And are there some missing facilities that might be able to be provided for as you go forward? And planning staff, if I've spoken incorrectly, please correct me.
Well, I would just add one point for context, and that is that the hospital campus and the university campus are zoned for single family homes. And they've existed as special exceptions in that zone. And so with the relocation of the hospital, it opens up questions of what's the city's idea of the highest and best use of that property. And then that got us thinking about the connectivity, as Susie mentioned earlier, and the multifamily homes on Maple Avenue. In other parts of the city, for instance, New Hampshire University, the intersection at Flower and Piney Branch, we've got mixed use zoning, which allows for some flexibility of residential and some commercial in that space. Is that something the city would want to consider for Maple Avenue? So I think the boundaries are drawn in a way to give us an opportunity to think together about what we would want to see happen here and then ensure that it's possible to happen here.
What's the level of participation?
I'm sorry, if I could just add that, John described a process, and this is a multi-year process, and the question that you asked is the question that I think we're shooting to answer probably in the spring. And so we're starting a conversation, and we want to hear, not just from city council, city staff, but also city residents, other stakeholders about what should the vision be, what should the questions be.
And then what's the participation been up to this point of, I guess, the major property owner of that hospital university campus?
So I think so. I'll answer. We had before the pandemic, there were a couple of conversations, just sort of very preliminarily, sort of getting to know the Washington Adventist and the university folks a little bit better. The lockdown put put an end to that. And again, we are, the purpose of the scope of work is to provide a geographic boundary in which zoning could potentially change. There's a study area that looks much more broadly at the connections to for example, Tacoma Langley Crossroads community, to the Long Branch community, and the conversations with property owners, with university, with residents, with the city, with other interested parties are all things that really have yet to begun in earnest and will be part of the process after we get a scope of work approved.
All right, now as a council member, you'll see the way I count. Now I want to ask my second question. The map is helpful, but only to a limited extent. Is there a URL or something you can give us that gives us a higher resolution version of this maps? Because I've already have questions from owners of property that appear near the border of that red border that goes around. And they want to know, are they in, are they out? Some people say, gosh, I want to be in because I really think that single family residential is not appropriate for my property. So is there a higher resolution map available?
We can provide that for you.
Okay.
But I would caveat it that
Yeah.
this is a proposal, and until the planning board approves the scope of work,
Right.
the line can move. So we are here, council member, to hear exactly what you're saying.
Mhm.
And if there are
Right.
properties that want to be included, we want to know what they are. But what we would send would be a draft.
I can't get opinions from people to say, gee, I don't agree with this if they can't tell what it is. And then lastly, I think one of the key influencers in this area and what potential uses or changing uses we might have of this area are focused around are centered around transportation. It's the dense population would mean that to be acceptable and palatable by the community at large would need, transportation mechanism that can handle that volume of residents. And so is that going to be one of the issues that's discussed?
John, you want to take that?
Yes, we will look at the transportation options in the plan. This larger plan shows the context. This is the future Purple Line station here, and there's a existing Tacoma Park Red Line station here, and we'll look at potential for making connections to those existing and future transit stops.
Yeah, we need a rainbow line that comes through this area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thank you.
We've got our first recommendation.
Right.
I would just quickly add, this is Leslie, that in terms of transportation, we will look at analyzing all transportation networks with all modes. So both pedestrian, bicycle, and mass transit and vehicular. And that's common and typical of any of the master plans that we do with the department.
Thank you. I yield the rest of my time to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. Next, Councilwoman Dvala.
Yes, thank you. I share Councilmember Siemens' excitement about seeing a map and being able to get some tangible start to this. Thank you so much for all your thought and planning going into this. On the boundary itself, I think I understand the inclusion of the community and school facilities. I'm a little less clear about the outlying parks. Presumably they're going to stay parks. And so if you're focused on zoning, I'm particularly Opal Daniels, I'm not personally getting it. I've had a number, I'm less familiar with the boundaries of the property. So on the what I guess is the southeast side, that's Carroll Avenue. That part there, yeah, the crossing the creek. The boundary of the university, that's Carroll Avenue there.
Yes.
And then what I don't know is on the across from that, that's what? Just straight across from it on the hospital property itself, the red line. That's what street for people who can't read.
That is Maple Avenue, Maplewood Avenue.
I'm sorry, say that again, Maplewood?
Maplewood Avenue.
Okay,
Here.
and I'm wondering, it's not my ward, but I'm wondering what the people on the other side of the street are gonna think about not being included unless the last time you talked about two levels of engagement. One was the actual study boundary and one was a little broader that included people who might be part of the engagement process. And I'm not hearing that this time. Are you still planning to do that in order to pick up people who are near the boundary? I know a lot of people just across Carroll Avenue in Ward 2 are very interested in the process. Don't necessarily, as Councilmember Siemens suggested, don't necessarily want their property to be in, but they would like to be engaged in the process. So my second question has to do with that. What's your process there?
Well, I'll answer this and I'll let Melissa jump in. The study area is much larger than the future boundary, whatever, or the plan boundary, whatever that happens to be. It's a much larger area. And when we do outreach, we include everybody who's affected, all the stakeholders, and that's including not just those people inside or property owners inside the boundary, but all those who live outside who may be affected or have an interest in this master plan. Melissa, you want to add to that?
I think you answered it perfectly.
Okay.
The way that our engagement is set up is that they are considered stakeholders as well. So stakeholders aren't just people that own property or live within kind of this red boundary that we've drawn. It's people who are utilizing the resources inside that boundary, people that kind of live, work, play, or visit within the area or would be impacted by a change that would occur within the boundary. So they would still be included. They would still be a part of the process. We would actually welcome them to participate in the process.
Okay, great. I'll take you up on that.
And also, if I can, I'm sorry, just to clarify for the parks, the inclusion of a property in a sector plan boundary is necessary in order to change zoning, but it's not necessary to change zoning on property. So I think, as the city manager mentioned, I think inclusion of Opal Daniels Park, inclusion of Hefner Park could really be opportunities for the sector plan to make recommendations about how to better connect those parks to either other city facilities, other parts of the neighborhood, new development potentially, in elsewhere in the plan area. So they can really just be sort of they can help sort of shine a spotlight on it and give it some attention rather than saying, okay, we're going to change the zoning because this is no longer going to be a park.
Okay, thanks. That helps. And so my last question has to do with zoning and whether it would make some sense if you're going to have some of the outlying parks to pick up a little more of those neighborhoods that might lend themselves to potentially allowing duplexes or other than single family, but not apartments. So I'm wondering if you've thought about, for lack of a better term, the buffer, and whether this study boundary might be just a tad bigger in order to include thinking about a buffer.
So this is Leslie Howerton. I would just add that on the slide we showed earlier about ongoing planning initiatives where we talked about the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative, and you don't have to go back there, John. I just want to bring that up. That, and Elsa had mentioned it earlier, that in terms of the boundary that we're showing today, you know, the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative is a countywide effort by the planning department to respond to some of those things that you just talked about, providing other attainable housing options besides a single family home, whether it's a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex within single family neighborhoods. And so we don't want to duplicate the efforts of that initiative that's ongoing right now. They have a different timeline, and some of our other sector plans are going to be basically referencing the recommendations that come out of that initiative to address some of these more diverse housing options. And so as we mentioned earlier, this is one of the reasons that we focused on the more multifamily housing properties, because we do have an initiative that's going countywide that will be addressing those exact things for the single family neighborhoods.
And what would the timing of that be?
Right now, the recommendations, planning staff is going to be presenting their recommendations to the planning board, I believe, on June 24th. And that will kick off any work sessions with the planning board. Once the planning, we don't know how many work sessions there are going to be, but once the planning board makes their recommendations, then they would be transmitted to the county council, probably later, sometime in the fall or winter.
So when you say presented to the, when you say June 24th, you don't mean the beginning of the process, you mean the recommendations coming out of the process?
So the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative will be presenting their preliminary recommendations to the planning board on June 24th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Actually, before we move on, just because Councilman Dabala mentioned Maplewood. So if the red line is on Maplewood, does that include both sides of the street?
No, it would be everything inside.
It would, so the right of way, so a decision would need to be made as to whether the right of way would be included. And so, John, are we showing the right of way?
Yeah, let me zoom in. Yeah,
The
what
entire right of way for infrastructure recommendations.
right now it scales is so large that the line runs down the middle of the street, but it could either be could go down the center line, in which we do in some cases in master plans, or it can include the entire right of way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, generally we're going to include the entire right of way, especially on the edge of the campus where, you know, there may need to be transportation or let's just say mobility related improvements, whether they're sidewalk or bike or whatever. I think we would be including the entire Maplewood right of way. So the side, you know, the portions of the property across the street, I can't remember if there's a sidewalk on the north side of Maplewood, but any portions of the property that were included in the right of way would be covered. The properties themselves would not be.
Yeah, we don't want to divide streets down the center for any infrastructure improvements that anybody may want to recommend.
All right, because it made me think about this when Councilman Dabala was speaking, because on Maplewood, on the far side of the street, actually are a number of duplexes on that street. It's not just single family homes. So maybe take another look at that and including given the conversation.
I would just say that it's not based on whether or not there's existing duplexes there, the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative. It's based on the zoning. So they're going to be making recommendations on multiple zones, R60 and others that may already have duplexes on them, and they're going to be making further recommendations. So we just want to be careful that when we look at it, that we're not duplicating efforts with that initiative.
Got it. Right.
But at the same time, like I said, we're here to get feedback from you, Mayor, and the council. And so if that was a priority for the city council, we could certainly, include that in the presentation to the planning board.
Right.
Yeah, I also think that that's true on Carroll as well, but someone can check that for me.
Okay. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. Councilman Costick.
Thank you all very much for the presentation and all the information. Councilmember Dabala asked a number of the questions that I had, and I feel like I'm still sort of trying to wrap my head around what capacity there is for analysis and consideration within the boundaries, and then a little bit external to those. In terms of transportation networks, for the areas that are outside of the boundaries but might be impacted by what happens within the boundaries, are those also considered in your analysis, and you make recommendations on those?
Yes.
Okay.
So our transportation analysis, our schools analysis, we look at a lot of things besides zoning. We go through a housing, schools, transportation, economic analysis. We do a lot of different analyses, and they incorporate the study area boundary, which is beyond the plan area boundary that you would see in red. Specifically for transportation, we have policy areas, and we have transportation analysis zones, TAZs, that we incorporate. So any outlying impacts that go beyond the plan boundary would be included in the study area analysis in the existing conditions.
Okay, thank you. I also had some questions regarding the parks. I think you all have done a good job in terms of explaining why those might be useful to include. And I do like the idea of connecting those parks more to the people who live in the neighborhood and don't always even know that they exist. I know in particular, Opal Daniels is in my ward and is just around the street from me. I spend a lot of time there, and I've seen it increasingly used during the pandemic. And one of the things I think is particularly special about the property is that it really does seem to be a very multi-generational use, from very young kids to teenagers. There's a field there and kind of a picnic table area where teenagers will sit, all the way up to older adults who walk their dogs through and spend time there. So I do think that has some really great uses and even more potential if it were better connected. There have been some improvements recently over the past few years in terms of connecting it down to the parking lot at Parkview Towers, which has been a huge connectivity bonus. But I'd love to see more opportunities there. My other question, and I know, from what you've said, it sounds like you don't want to include properties sort of just for the sake of including them. But I wondered, from an equity perspective and a connectivity perspective, if there are advantages or disadvantages to having this not include more of the single family properties. Because right now we do have kind of a divide between the single family and multifamily properties in terms of where they're located, and there being kind of a space that is mostly multifamily and a space that is more single family, and not always great connectivity between them. So I'm just wondering what the advantages or disadvantages are, or if there could be some advantage to including some more of the single family properties that are immediately adjacent, particularly along Sherman or Grant or Geneva and those sorts of areas.
I think that's something we can definitely look at in collaboration with the Attainable Housing Strategies and figure that out. So we can definitely take your comment and make sure we include it in our planning board report. I think until we know the extent of the recommendations that are going to be made for more attainable housing options, it's a little hard to address here, but I think we can definitely work with the AHS team at our office and figure out what are the disadvantages and advantages. I think some of the initial disadvantages in the mind of our planning director would be, well, if we're making recommendations for our 60 zones to allow more attainable housing types up to some of the more house scale, like fourplexes, triplexes, and duplexes. If we include it in the boundary, you probably don't want to be upzoning them beyond what they're already going to upzone those properties to do. So we'll definitely take a look at the clear advantages and disadvantages as we work with the AHS team to see what their preliminary recommendations are going to be on June 24th. And as I mentioned, June 24th for the planning board date for attainable housing. I just want to mention, when we talked about the schedule on our slide, the planning board presentation of this scope of work for the minor master plan amendment here in this boundary is going to be July 15th, not the 24th. So I just want to make a clarification there. And Elsa, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Nothing to add.
Great, thank you very much.
I think it's an important question. Thank you.
Great. Councilman Searcy.
Thank you all so much for coming out and walking us through this. So there is a small kind of commercial strip that's between Kennebec and Erie, Masakunda, and a couple of, and it doesn't appear like they're within any of the boundaries. So what is their current zoning, and does it make sense for them? I know it would seem, well, I mean, this boundary is already wonky, so I don't think it would make it look any crazier than it is. Does it make sense to incorporate that commercial piece into this mini master plan, if that makes sense at all?
Yep.
Because I don't think it's covered anywhere else.
Yeah, so I think you already have mixed use zoning on that property. You have a maximum height of 50 feet on those properties. I want to say the overall density is probably a 0.75. We can look it up and get back to you. I think our thinking was that there's sufficient, the zoning there, just sort of given the scale of the site and sort of the surrounding density, that there's probably enough zoning on the site to accommodate a redevelopment. But given the sort of the size of it, it may not redevelop. So we did not include it for sort of that reason.
Councilmember Searcy, it was on the early versions of maps that we went back and forth on. I actually think it's useful to include, because not only is there the commercial strip, but for the first half block on Erie, there's a variety of kind of almost mixed use industrial along with, or warehouse along with some, apartments or whatever. So it is kind of a strange area, and I kind of like to think about it as part of the overall, but that's just, I don't know that the zoning itself has to change to go towards a vision, but I don't think there's been a vision identified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's where, I kind of get torn, right? Because we've had lots of conversation already about the fact that quite a few things are being included, not necessarily for zoning reasons, but for connectivity and, really trying to bridge that sense of community, right? So if we are, because there are some natural land divides that kind of separate the Washington Adventist campus, you have the creek, there's a difference between what's easily accessible to folks that are at the Washington Adventist campus versus what may be more easily accessible to folks that are on the other leg of Maple Avenue. And so, in my mind, I would say that Masakunda site, it's part of that network for the Washington Adventist site, right? Because that's the piece that's closest to them. And if we're talking about connectivity, that might be something we want to consider. I would also encourage, when you all are thinking about transportation connectivity, I know you talked about Purple Line, the Tacoma and Langley station, and you talked about the Red Line, but there is another Purple Line station that's up at that Giant. And so for folks that are at that WA campus, their closest may actually be that site, which means when you're thinking about where people may be moving and what they may be doing at that WA site, I do think that Masakunda site might be worth including, because I think it's probably going to be the link that people that are at that site might more likely travel up and down Flower Avenue. So that's just something to consider, to just make sure that we're kind of capturing or kind of thinking through all of the commercial parcels along the stretch.
Great.
If I can just make one more comment that's a little bit different, and that's just to highlight that the that the red boundary that's close there, it does also go outside of the city limits to incorporate all of Washington Adventist University's campus. And so just as we're going forward, recognizing that there will be coordination with the neighborhood folks outside of the city limits as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, I think this is awesome.
Great. Councilman Duvall.
Yes, thank you. Just one more question that occurred to me as I was thinking about transportation and connectivity. We just heard a presentation about a Maple Avenue Complete Streets project, which is the two parts of Maple Avenue on the other side of the creek from the campus, and wondering how those two projects connect. Does the planning for the Maple Avenue Complete Street feed into this? How is that going to work? Thank you.
I can answer that. Yeah, we would take into consideration any plans underway and other and that affect the study area, and incorporate those changes or the recommendations into our plan, or at least let them inform what we're doing as we move forward.
And I would just add the Maple Avenue Complete Streets project is from Sligo Creek Parkway to Carroll Avenue at the DC line. And so the boundaries aren't completely the same, but the stretch from Philadelphia to Sligo Creek is definitely overlaps. And that's probably the part that may have more opportunity for really incorporating bike and ped amenities as well. We are in the very early stages, completing 30% design or preliminary design, and we have not identified funding sources to move forward on that at this point.
Was that it, Councilman Duvall? Yeah, okay. And I'm not seeing any other hands up. Does anybody have any other questions or comments, not just on the boundary survey, but on what was presented on the community engagement piece that Melissa ran through for us? Councilman Searcy?
So will there be specific outreach with the Washington Advances University leadership, and very targeted outreach in terms of student population and the like, which is often very, very, very different from, City of Tacoma Park proper engagement?
Yes, I would say that our goal is that we are going to try and work as closely as possible with all of the major property owners. That's something that we typically do on every plan. And it's kind of a separate process because this is an institutional use. It will probably be a little more involved than what we normally do. But we are also trying to figure out ways to engage the student population. It gets a little tricky because of, coming out of the pandemic. We're not sure if people are still going to be learning virtually, or are people going to be back on campus. So we're going to have to create this hybrid process that's probably going to lean heavily on working with the university and finding out how are they in fact reaching out to their student population. But we do actually have a section in a document that we've created that identified all of the audiences that will need to be addressed as a part of our engagement and outreach strategy. And we did identify the institutional uses, along with not just the students at the university, but also the MCPS students, because sometimes they are often left out of the process as well. And so we're trying to make sure that we are looking at youth engagement opportunities from K through 12 and at the university level.
Great, thank you.
Great. And just so you know, we have a youth council in Tacoma Park. We may want to add that to the list of.
I think we have them added to the list, but
yeah.
we're really going to be reaching out to them. We're going to need as much assistance as we can, just because, we love the youth, but we know they're fickle. So we need to have a youth on our side in order to let us know what's the best way to engage them in this process.
Yeah.
Great. And the university has a very active student government. So that's also really helpful. I don't know when the new, the current student body president, I remember how long their terms are. Probably a year, but I know he's on campus right now, or had been before.
Great.
Classes ended, but they're a pretty active student government there as well.
Thank you for those tips, Mayor Stewart. Those are going to be incredibly helpful.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I apologize if I already have received this, but I wonder if I could get a list of contact information for each of the county planning leaders that are on this call tonight.
Definitely. We actually have a slide that has our contact information at the end.
All
So
right.
we'll send you this presentation at the end.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great. Councilman DeBala.
Yeah, along the community engagement lines, did I hear you say that there was a bit more of a detailed strategy developed already that perhaps we could look at and comment on? And things like the youth council is obvious, but if we looked at it, maybe something would come to us.
We are finalizing that strategy. It's actually has to go through our communications team. And so we've been working with staff at the City of Tacoma Park to kind of compile all of this information and put it together in a format that's going to make sense. But ultimately, we will have a document that we can share with you.
Okay. So if we have suggestions, run them through city staff to get them to you before this is final?
Yep.
I guess it would depend. I'm completely okay with you sending the information directly to me, but we do have kind of a counterpart on the city staff side. I don't know if they would prefer to have it go to them first and then they could disseminate it. Either way is fine for me.
Right, only because they might have already thought of it.
Yeah, we have points of contact set up with our MOU, and the main point of contact, just for clarity and efficiency, and is Roz on the city staff part and myself on this end.
Great, thank you.
And I would just like to add that there's more information on the city website. If you go to tacomaparkmd.gov and drop in minor master plan into the search engine, it'll take you to a page on the city site, which is also linked to the county page with documents. And I'll put this presentation up, if not tonight, then certainly tomorrow. So it'll be available to everyone.
Great.
And we've been working with Roz to link both of our websites. From the planning department website that you see here, we're linking to your city website for the minor master plan as well. So we're trying to coordinate as best as possible.
Great. And just to go back, I think it was Councilman Searcy, you mentioned it before, but I imagine you've also gotten Washington Adventist University's feedback on the boundary proposal, or we'll do that before going to the planning board.
You know, we haven't yet. We don't typically. So we included all of the Washington Adventist owned properties around the campus. So that included some of the properties that are currently developed with single family residences. So we don't generally, I mean, typically because in master plans, you have so many property owners that by the time you talk to them all. But I think that, you know, I think we have time to reach out to them and say, this is what we're thinking, and give them the opportunity to comment. So I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I think so, because I think it goes back to the point Councilman Searcy made before about the businesses along the Erie, Kennebec area there that isn't currently included. They may have some insights also about just the area, given how long they've been there, that we haven't thought about yet. You know, the university actually used to own property in that small shopping strip. So they, Patrick Farley over there may have actually some interesting insights from their perspective on the boundaries.
Okay.
So, Great. Anyone else have anything? No? All right. So information on our website, on the city website, we are going to get a link so that we could look a little bit more closely at the current boundary plan. And you all are going before the planning board on June 24th. So
July
July
15th. I made the
July 15th.
correction earlier,
Okay,
sorry,
right.
from John's schedule. July 15th, we pushed it in order to give all of us time to meet with you and
great.
to review everything.
I can see I remembered the June 24th.
Yeah, no,
Written in
that's
my brain now.
July 15th.
July 15th. So we have more time. So that's excellent. Great. Terrific. All right. Seeing no other comments or anything, just another thank you very much for coming out tonight. We're really looking forward to this process and working with you all. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having
Thank you
us.
so much for having us.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.